Hello and welcome back to World of Tanks. Today we'll be looking at the AT-2, Tier 5 tank destroyer for the British line. And yeah, many people are familiar with this thing and what it's capable of, basically because of its ridiculous armor and what, it has probably the best armor at a Tier 5. I mean, there's no getting around it. It does have the best armor. People have issues, fighting this thing, and rightfully so. I mean, it's got all that armor to protect itself, and, well, it has fairly decent guns that'll, do a lot of damage to you if you're not careful. Basically, it has two guns. It has a high damage, slow reload gun, and then it has a faster firing gun that has a low alpha damage to it, but both are pretty effective at taking on enemies of the same tier. And one of the biggest problems I see when I confront this tank is that people on my team will come across this thing, and the AT-2 itself is sitting on a lane across from my teammates, and this thing is just pounding them endlessly, and the teammates just sit there, and usually they're of the same tier. So one of the best things you can do when you find this thing on a lane is avoid it entirely, especially if you do not have the means of fighting back. If you have stock junk on your tank, it's best to completely avoid it and, well, go somewhere else. Find a new area to fight the enemy. If you're feeling particularly, brave, you can find a way around this tank and, attack it from the sides. Or if you're extremely lucky, you can, attack it from the rear. The reason I say lucky is because usually this tank is followed by other tanks that are either protecting this thing or just in the vicinity itself. And if you're trying to engage this tank from behind, chances are that the enemies themselves, such as mediums, heavies that are within the same area, will take you out, and, well, that's the end of your game because you were trying to defeat this thing. So yeah, don't sit on a lane if you have a weakly armored tank. Not unless you have the means of actually causing damage to this thing. One of the best ways to get rid of this thing is to single it out for Artie. I mean, yeah, Artie can take care of this thing because it's fairly slow at 20, at least I think it's 20 kilometers last I checked. Always single it out for Artie, because just, you're not going to do much if you aren't capable of penning this thing, and, well, frontally, you aren't going to do much. Now, a lot of people say this commander's hatch is a weak spot, but it has a fair amount of armor to it, and, well, it's rounded out. You need a fairly powerful gun to, hit this thing head on and actually penetrate it. So if you're just going to sit on the same lane as he is, and you're going to, who's going to have the advantage, you or him? He's got all this armor. You probably don't have that armor, and you're trying to pen this weak spot, and, he's going to be, individual sitting in this tank is going to be pelting you constantly with its gun, and you're just going to get destroyed eventually, either by him or his teammates who, have you spotted. So keep that in mind when dealing with this tank. So yeah. Now, like I said, on to the next stuff. How do you deal with this thing? I mean, just because you're behind the thing, you've managed to successfully get behind the AT-2. If you're Tier 5, you might find yourself with another problem. How do you pen the thing? I mean, I've seen people that actually successfully get themselves behind this tank, and they still have trouble penning this commander's hatch. So what are you going to do? I mean, especially if you have garbage stock on your tank, like stock guns and whatever. you're using HE shells, you know, chances are you're gonna have a very difficult time penning this thing from behind. Even the back of this so-called turret, it's not really a turret, you know, you'll have a difficult time penning this thing all around, especially if you're tier 5. One of the best things to do is, you know, if you're behind, just track the thing. Track it. You know, just continue to track the thing. And hopefully Artie will destroy it, or your teammates that have better guns than you will take care of this individual, the 82. Yeah, like I said, if you got stock guns, having trouble penning this, go for the tracks. Let your teammates, you know, take care of it. I can't stress that enough. I mean, I've seen people, you know, they try continuously hitting the commander's hatch, and the AT2 itself is moving, you know, and it's not good because it'll allow it to defend itself against, you know, teammates that are coming in to try and help you. Better yet, you can let him try to face you, let the enemy AT2 try to, you know, face you, and then take out its tracks. That way you can't destroy your teammates. So, you know, what are tanks that could actually counter this thing? I found that the Churchill 1, which is a tier 5 heavy tank, the British tree, with its final package, it can do a fair amount of damage to this thing. You know, because it has such a high, it does have a fairly high pen value to it, and, you know, it shouldn't have an issue hitting this commander's hatch continuously. And it does have fairly good armor to rely on, but, you know, keep in mind that if the AT2 is aware of your weak spots, which is mainly usually the turret on the Churchill 1, he's gonna abuse that, and he might do a bit, you know, a fair bit of damage to you, especially if he has the high damage gun. Either way, he's capable of taking you out if you're not careful. You gotta angle your armor and be wary of your weak turret. And funnily enough, I have found that the Wolverine with high explosives is fairly, you know, decent against this thing. But as with anything, you have to keep in mind that the Wolverine itself is lightly armored, and, you know, you might want to pick your shots carefully if you're using that thing. Don't just sit there and expect that AT2 isn't gonna defend itself if you've managed to land a hit on this thing. Yeah, Wolverine, tier 5 tank destroyer, high explosives. And of course the KV-1 with the final packages, as with anything else. The AT2 will have trouble penetrating the KV-1 because of its really good armor. You know, it does have that, you know, obvious weak spot in the middle of its hull. Everyone should be aware of that by now. So yeah, you might want to angle that before you engage this thing. And you might want to keep in mind that he likely does have teammates behind him or around him, especially if he's sitting on a lane. It's a common thing that you see with these AT2. So before you engage with your KV-1 and its fully upgraded packages, keep that in mind, and always aim for this commander's hatch. That's the only way you're gonna pen this thing. There are other vehicles that are capable of doing damage. Even the Hetzer, which is a tier 4 tank destroyer, can, you know, do some damage to this thing, but as with anything, you just have to be careful about it. And finally, Artie. I mean, I did mention this before, but always try to single this thing out with Artie. That way you can take it out, do damage. If this thing is left unchecked, it can wreak havoc upon your teammates, as with a lot of other tank destroyers that are heavily armored from the front. So yeah, that pretty much covers it for the AT2. I will see you guys later. Bye.